корпоративных программах иногда...
Саша, ничего не говори, не надо рассказывать, как у вас на корпоративных программах. Мы рады вас видеть со включенными камерами. Мое уважение вам и нашему программному менеджеру.
Да, хорошо, извините.
Всем здрасте.
Так, ну что, кто начнет? Сразу я, Вань, ты, Рит, ты?
Да, Саша, наверное, ты сразу.
Можешь начинать.
Не тратим время,
да.
лучше оставим на вопрос.
Да.
Да, спасибо. Смотрите, у нас сессия, Ваня попросил ее провести, нам дали наши любезные коллеги полчаса, вот, поэтому мы их можем посвятить нашему проектному треку. Вот, я долго думал, как же нам назвать нашу сессию, вот, и потом у меня родилась мысль, что это, знаете, сессия «Вспомнить все». Вот так. В чем как бы сложность, в чем основной вызов? В том, что, конечно, тяжело начинать программу перед Новым годом, потому что Новый год он так стирает многие вещи. Вот, поэтому давайте сейчас попробуем поговорить, что у нас появилось новое, что вы про это думаете, ответить на ваши вопросы. У меня очень короткие сообщения, я буквально там один слайд обновил, и хотел бы вам им поделиться, а вы пока про это... Так, стоп, это все не то. А вы пока думаете над своими вопросами, и через буквально 5 минут мы с вами к этой секции вопросов и ответов приступим. Что у нас было запланировано на проектном треке? Мы с вами прошли митап 4 декабря и 18 декабря, то есть до Нового года, где попытались описать сначала наш проект через простые вопросы, зачем, что, как, и если у нас команда на реализацию этого проекта. Затем мы с вами использовали iCanvas, который нам давал Павел Алферов, соответственно, на первом модуле, и попытались сделать более глубокое описание нашего проекта, подумать, где мы берем данные, для кого, какую проблему мы решаем, даже, возможно, подумать над какой-то элементарной финансовой моделью. Вот. И затем у нас были после Нового года запланированы питчи, соответственно, 15 и 29, для того, чтобы мы собрались такие в крупные команды и поработали над проектами. Что во время Нового года, новогодних праздников мы поняли по результатам первых 2 наших встреч, что наше предположение было, что у нас останется 15 проектов, и оставшиеся участники присоединятся, мы проведем эти питчи для того, чтобы оставшиеся участники присоединились к этим 15 проектам. Что у нас получилось по факту? По факту у нас получилось сейчас 28 проектов на 35 участников, и, соответственно, мы решили отказаться от питчей и предложили вам в те же даты, 15 и 29, провести метап-сессии и фактически обозначить через эти метапы старт проекта. Что значит старт проекта? С 15-го те, кто пришли, и 29-го те, кто придут, к вам прикрепляется, к вашему проекту прикрепляется трекер, и с этим трекером в формате двухнедельного спринта, то есть это значит, что вы один раз в 2 недели с ним встречаетесь. Вот пока вам предложили также субботу утро, чтобы было удобно вам и удобно трекерам. И вот этими двухнедельными спринтами движетесь, соответственно, до первой контрольной точки, которая у нас будет 19 марта, где мы посмотрим на результат вашего исследования, где вы сделали аудит данных, где вы посмотрели, какие данные у вас есть, какие данные вам нужны для вашего проекта, что, кстати, коррелируется с тем модулем, который проходит у вас сейчас, и в том числе и про источники данных вам тоже рассказывают. К сожалению, ну или не к сожалению, так получилось, что 15 числа у нас пришло только 4 проекта. Вот, соответственно, у нас сейчас 4 проекта понимают, какой трекер за ними закреплен, какой консультант стратегически и технологически закреплен за этим проектом. И, соответственно, также все остальные, кто придет 29-го, мы очень надеемся, что будут все оставшиеся проекты, потому что те, кто не придет 29-го, будет достаточно сложно, то есть тогда придется уже после 29-го как-то к вам возвращаться и договариваться о дополнительных еще встречах. Соответственно, 29-го, после 29-го у каждого проекта, который решит продолжать двигаться в рамках программы, будет определен свой трекер, будет установлена периодичность встреч, не реже раз в 2 недели с трекером, и, соответственно, закреплены стратегические и технологические консультанты. Что бы нам хотелось, чтобы до 29-го вы сделали? Когда мы встречались с вами 18 числа, 18 декабря и 4 декабря, вам и трекеры, и консультанты давали обратную связь по доработке ваших проектов. Поэтому мы хотели бы, чтобы вы либо это вспомнили и, соответственно, докрутили ваши AI-канвасы до 29-го и прислали нам по возможности их заранее, до 28-го. Либо, если вы по каким-либо причинам забыли те комментарии, которые вам давали, потеряли, выпало или еще что-то, мы готовы эти комментарии, они у нас все есть, мы готовы их собрать, обработать и вам, соответственно, по вашему запросу прислать. Вот. И последнее, что я хотел бы, наверное, сказать, что Михаил Недяк, наш академический директор, видит большой смысл в нашей с вами деятельности, в нашем проектном треке, поэтому он предложил, мы сейчас как раз находимся в стадии разработки, такой маленький анонс, да, что 26 февраля в рамках его очного модуля на кампусе он также нам в субботу с утра выделит 2-3 часа для того, чтобы мы смогли с вами поработать. Вот наша идея на эту сессию, готов выслушать ваше предложение, наша идея на эту сессию — попробовать вас объединить то, что мы называем кластеры, либо по отраслевому принципу, либо по тем задачам, которые вы решаете своим проектом, либо по стадии, на той, на которой вы находитесь в рамках реализации своего проекта. Подробнее об этом, понятно, как будет объединять в эти кластеры, наверное, после 29-го, то есть когда мы с вами еще раз все встретимся и уже с трекерами 26 февраля мы вот эти кластеры в том числе покажем. Вот, у меня все. Задавайте вопросы, готов на них отвечать. Пишите в чат, как удобно. Так. Либо я что-то не то сказал, либо всем все понятно.
Вопрос такой по поводу 29-го. То есть тайминг будет отдельно, да, определен? В какое время, как будем общаться?
Так, смотрите, 29 числа вам уже предложили табличку. Мы хотели бы с каждым проектом подробно разобраться и выделить на каждый проект не меньше, чем час. Поэтому 29 числа мы вам предложим записаться в соответствующее окошко или сами раскидаем эти окошки с 10 примерно до часа. Почему? Потому что там сложность в чем? Мы хотели 14 проектов получить 15 числа и 29 14, так как у нас 7 трекеров и тоже есть пересечение по страт-консультантам на проектах. Попробуем все равно 29-го как-то все уложиться и эти пересечения как-то раскидать, чтобы не было у одного трекера в один и тот же момент по 2 проекта или у одного из консультантов по 2 проекта. Поэтому попробуем как-то сделать хорошее, удобное для всех расписание. И дальше мы вам предложим до первой контрольной точки результаты исследования 19 марта двигаться вот этим двухнедельным спринтом, и тоже по субботам предложим вам все-таки это делать, чтобы было удобно, чтобы не мешало основной деятельности. Если это будет как-то двигаться, то уже более оперативно, с трекером будете сами себя настраивать. Но пока я все-таки просил бы вас, по возможности, давайте мы с вами договаривались на старте, субботу утро уделять нашим проектам.
Окей.
Я просто вслух озвучу, просто Ярослав пишет, и я слышал еще от ребят до этого, можно ли получить все-таки, как пишет, можно ли получить комментарий по проекту?
Да, давайте мы эти комментарии тогда обработаем.
Маргарита тоже пишет, да.
Да, почему мы на самом деле их не выслали? Они достаточно некоторые критичны, скажем так. Вот. И мы эту критичность хотели бы снизить, потому что вы понимаете, что наши консультанты, они ребята не из образования, вот. И некоторые их комментарии, они такие прям хорошие.
Так
Ой, а
может
можно
быть-
без купюр?
Да, наоборот.
Давайте
поддерживаю.
Ой,
сделаем,
да,
как
зачем?
оно есть.
Вроде все
Конечно.
взрослые.
Да.
Да,
Единственное, что
Чем
можно
жестче,
тогда...
тем лучше. Там вот такие
Если
же
можно
Вроде
выслать-
как есть, да.
Так,
Может быть,
подождите, давайте
лично
получим.
каждому. Лично
Дорогие
каждому.
студенты, я горжусь вами.
Не вопрос, просите пожестче, давайте пожестче. Вот. Мы же только за.
А то потом вы сгладите, мы не доделаем что-то. Так что лучше как есть. да.
Давайте вы вот это на финал оставите, вот это вот к нам. Нежное отношение.
Да, да.
Саша, эти люди вечерами учат питон, им ничего не
Слушайте,
страшно.
да эти люди по вечерам включают камеры, я в шоке. Я говорю, мне не хватает моего маленького монитора.
Хорошо, сделаем. Рит, давай Соню попросим, просто сделаем. А еще был вопрос, я забыл, какой. Какой-то вопрос был еще, по-моему, в чатике. Нет, все, пока, все. Вопрос вот какой. Я хотел спросить, потому что с Ритой общались, когда. Если у ребят сейчас нет трекера, то куда им обращаться именно по проектным вопросам? Куда можно писать?
Да, смотрите, трекера, что называется, давайте сейчас прямо эту табличку. Ребят, кто не с нами, выключайте, пожалуйста, микрофон, кто общается по своим каким-то вещам. Да, давайте, во-первых, быстрее вписываться вот в эту табличку на 29-й, и тогда уже сразу у вас появляется трекер, и вы непосредственно к нему можете обращаться. Можете обращаться к Рите Лизе, но и, безусловно, можете обращаться ко мне. Вот. Единственное, если я вдруг начну вас сбрасывать, значит, я на программе, но если вы будете писать, там, WhatsApp, Telegram, куда удобно, вот я точно вам оперативно отвечу. Ну и не бойтесь, набирайте еще раз, если даже сбросил там, через какое-то время.
Спасибо большое, Саш, за такую открытость. Мы тогда сейчас просто твой ник в Телеграме напишем ребятам, да, и все, что
Да,
могли
конечно,
писать,
да.
обращаться, договариваться о коротких созвонах.
Да, конечно.
Супер.
Смотрите, давайте тогда, если уж вы хотите без купюр, давайте я тоже вам верну свою обратную связь. По итогам 15 числа, понятно, что у нас выборка сейчас пока небольшая, всего 4 проекта были, но все-таки хотелось вам дать такую обратную связь, что проекты сильно не прирастают. Вот те комментарии, которые вам дают, вы их либо как-то забываете, игнорируете, не фиксируете, вот, либо в документе, вот самом именно в AI Canvas, они никаким образом не отображают, не улучшают его, то есть нет вот этой вот итерационности, да, когда мы с каждым шагом улучшаем наш проект. Безусловно, что она появится, когда мы с вами с трекером вы будете двигаться и планировать вот эти двухнедельные спринты, накидывать бэклог задач, и его либо делать, либо нет, и вам это будет возвращать. Но вот мне хотелось бы, чтобы все-таки у нас не выпадали вот эти большие периоды. Хотя, безусловно, по некоторым проектам, которые заинтересованы, которые, я так понимаю, были самые заинтересованные, пришли сразу после Нового года, 15 числа, вот видно, что есть прогресс, вот поэтому мы рассчитываем на такой прогресс и по остальным проектам. Если в какой-то момент времени мы поймем, что количество проектов у нас снижается, кто-то не готов тащить свой проект, или там, большая нагрузка, или вдруг почему-то изменились приоритеты, то мы тогда будем тоже это регулировать и попробуем, может быть, тогда наши питчи перенести уже после первой нашей контрольной точки 19 марта, и после нее провести питчи, и вы там сможете присоединиться к тому проекту, который будет интересен вам, и вместе поделать его с кем-то из участников программы. Давайте еще вопросики. У нас еще время есть.
Да, Александр, я хотел задать вопрос. Я подключился, ну, собственно, как и Дамир, Дамир Курмакаев. Со второго модуля, и мне кажется, как бы пока целостной картины не сложилось, вот до 29-го хотелось бы еще какую-то там одну встречу провести. То есть нам вот этот модуль говорили, что он есть в других программах, и мы его пройдем. Но так как вот есть этот пробел, как бы там общая целостная картина пока не складывается, и вообще, то есть тем проектом, который есть, хотелось бы его, ну, об кого-то там стучать, чтобы сказали, что, ребят, ну, как бы, или туда, или не туда.
Да, хорошо, давайте тогда договоримся или через Риту, или напрямую. Мы просто с вами запланируем тогда встретиться 22-го. Либо ребята, я попрошу трекеров кого-то встретиться с вами, кто уже встречался. Вот, либо, если не будет возможности, сам встречу. Мы с вами проговорим.
Хорошо, через Риту, да?
Ну, или через Риту, или напрямую напишите потом, когда контакт бросите.
Да, хорошо, договорились, спасибо.
Друзья, вы все в ожидании питона?
У нас табло сегодня.
Питон и анаконда.
Понятно.
Денис присоединился, значит, сейчас будет жарко.
Всем привет.
Привет. Сказали, что у тебя есть вопросы.
Да нет, все хорошо.
Да, смотрите, опять же, если у вас нет вопросов, давайте я попробую заполнить паузу. Мы сейчас на этой программе фактически с вами строим самолет и летим сразу, да? И на самом деле лучшее пытаемся дать. И вот этот проектный трек, мне кажется, в рамках как раз такой degree программы, это как раз когда мы как школа пытаемся вам предоставить все самое лучшее. Но делание проекта – это все-таки ваша ответственность, да? Если вы не готовы ее как-то нести, эту ответственность, не готовы над проектом работать, то будет это достаточно сложно нам с вами делать. В какой-то момент вы, наверное, сами должны принять решение, насколько вы готовы, не готовы этот проект реализовывать. Мы со своей стороны, вы заметили, собрали достаточно много ресурсов, спасибо Ивану за это, и многие уже смогли оценить ребят-консультантов из Accenture, и не только. Вот. Трекеры с вами готовы двигаться в режиме вот этих двухнедельных спринтов. Но если вы как бы не приходите, не видите в этом смысла, то тогда мы и прирастать на проекте тоже не будем. Поэтому давайте вместе такую вот ответственность разделим за это. Еще про вопросы, комментарии, уточнения.
Значит, резюмируя 29-го, правильно я тебя сейчас резюмирую, Саш? Работаем по часу с каждым проектом, оттуда выходим, понимая, кто наш трекер.
Кто наш трекер, кто наш консультант стратегический, технологический, с договоренностью, как мы идем двухнедельными спринтами и с списком задач, бэклогом задач, что мы делаем до следующей встречи с трекером. Соответственно, каждый месяц у нас будет как минимум 2 встречи с трекером и стратегические, технологические консультанты по запросу. Сейчас мы запланировали пока 1 встречу в месяц, вот, возможно, чаще, если это понадобится. 19.03 у нас контрольная точка, и 26 февраля у нас будет сессия, где мы попробуем как гипотеза объединить вас в кластеры. Если не кластеры, то предложения другие тоже от вас принимаются. Только давайте их заранее, а не там 25-го, да, потому что сложно планировать, проектов много, и механика будет чуть сложнее. И договорились, что в эту субботу те, кто к нам присоединился со второго модуля, да, мы, ну, чуть позже, скажем так, вот мы устроим встречу с трекерами. И еще раз, 29-го час будет на каждый проект, комментарии без купюр все пришлем.
Отлично. А что можно сделать для того, чтобы подготовиться максимально классно и взять максимум 29-го, Саша?
29-го, во-первых, посмотреть на эти комментарии, попробовать учесть в iCanvas. Во-вторых, это в
Извини, выключаю.
первую очередь ваш проект, поэтому я бы точно с вашей стороны подумал бы над перечнем вопросов, которые волнуют вас, и прямо его составил бы для себя, который вы хотели бы задать трекерам, консультантам. Ну и прийти на сессию, на встречу.
Хорошо, спасибо. Мне еще... Нет, все. У нас все. Если нет вопросов, тогда готовимся к 29-му, а сейчас передаем слово. Саш, если с командой
Да, спасибо
передадим.
большое. Передаем Алексу. Мы с ним сейчас пошутили, что я спросил полное имя Александра. Он говорит, да, Александр. Я говорю, ну, осторожнее, в России иногда сокращение Алекс расценивают как Алексей. Вот, хорошо вам позаниматься. Сила воли ваша огромная. И увидимся с вами онлайн и очно, надеюсь, 26 февраля. Всего хорошего.
Спасибо. Спасибо.
Спасибо.
Спасибо.
All right, over to me. Welcome back, everyone. So today, session 3, we're going to be focusing on storytelling, data visualization, dashboarding. We're going to work a little bit in Python, and we're going to work a little bit in Tableau as well. If you have not had a chance to download Tableau yet, you may want to start it now. It's a very large program. Tableau Public is free. It's what I use, and it's what I'll be working with today. Before we get into content, a little bit of admin today. First is we're going to post your team assignments very soon. Rita and I are just working on getting that translated for you. Those will be team assignments due at the end of the course. We're also going to post details on your final team projects. These are your big projects that wrap up the course. Speaking with Mikhail, we want to offer you 2 options for the team project. The first is if you want to do a data audit as part of your capstone projects, you can do that individually. This would mean basically collecting the data, running some analysis, cleaning it up, some data visualizations, things like that. So this should help you move along your capstone project a little bit. If you're not ready to do that, or if you don't want to, the alternative is a team project where you'll work in your teams, you will source some data, and you'll use techniques we learned in the class today to solve a business problem. I find that these projects are most successful if you're able to source data from your workplace. But I also understand that's not always possible. I work for a bank, we don't share our data. You may find you're in the same position. There is a lot of data available online for free. For example, Kaggle is a website with many free data sets, ranging from housing prices to temperature, economic indicators. I've seen traffic tickets. I've seen sports analytics. So lots of opportunities on Kaggle. I've also seen students pull data from government websites, so economic data, statistics, statistics on demographics. I know Statistics Canada, the US Census Bureau, publishes a lot of data that you might find interesting to work with. We will make a posting on Canvas covering all of this information so you have it available to you. You don't need to tell me what you're going to do. In the last session of the course, I'm going to meet with every team and we'll talk about your projects. That way I can give you some advice, I can set you down the right path, I can help you with some of the programming. And of course, we'll have moderators and things like that to help as well. So all of that to come very, very soon. Once it's translated, we'll have it all posted to Canvas. And of course, if you have any questions, you can always send me an email and I'll get back to you right away. The name of the site I mentioned is Kaggle. I will put it in the chat. Kaggle is it's almost an analytics competition website. So anyone can go on Kaggle and try and solve an analytics problem. There's a leaderboard and it keeps track of how accurate your model is. Some of them actually have very big prizes associated with them, $50,000 US if you're the best at solving this problem. What I will say is that be careful with some of the projects on Kaggle that have big dollar values associated with them, because they're really, really hard problems. These are problems that PhD data scientists are working on solving. So don't take on more than you can chew, especially if you're just getting used to Python. The other thing is some of the data sets require very powerful computers to work with. So just be cautious about which data set you end up downloading from Kaggle. Before I jump into content today, let me pause. Any questions, comments, thoughts? Okay, we will get all this posted to Canvas so you can review. And if you do have any questions, you can email me or Margarita anytime. All right, today we're going to talk about storytelling and data visualization. And I know this is an analytics program and an analytics course. This is much more a soft skill than an analytics skill, but I think it's very, very important. My experience is that you can have the best programmers, the best model, the best analytics in the world, but if you can't tell people at your organization why it's important and the value it's going to bring, no one does anything with it. I've seen many projects fail because people couldn't tell the right story or give a good presentation. I like to make fun of the last company I worked at. Last class, I told you about their $150 million technology failure. I'll tell you about another one. This bank spent a lot of money, millions of dollars again, buying an AI company to come in and do work for them. And their very first project that they worked on for months and months and months. And eventually we're in this very big meeting with senior executives talking about what they were doing. And for 30 or 45 minutes of this 1 hour meeting, they were telling these executives all about the technical problems that they were having, all about the models that they were building. And they were talking about Python and scikit-learn and deep learning models. No one was paying any attention at all. And it wasn't until someone started telling the story about the tens of millions of dollars of benefit this could provide the organization that anyone started listening at all. And they wasted the entire session. They wasted many months not getting anyone to believe in what they were actually doing. And these were some of the brightest people in the country in this space. So I think it's very important. I think that it's a big part of success in analytics. And for people like you who are going to be analytics leaders in their organization, who are going to perhaps build analytics teams, you're going to need to be able to convince people that investing in this is the right thing to do. So we'll spend a little bit of time talking about theory, and then we'll get some practice. We'll practice doing data visualizations in Python. We'll practice doing data visualizations in Tableau, and we'll talk a little bit about dashboards. And the first thing we're going to talk about is how to tell stories, how to make a presentation. The first thing I want to say here is that storytelling is actually historically important. And there's research done on how a good story actually helps increase cooperation, increase belief. So when you're thinking about trying to accomplish something with analytics, there does have to be a story around it. It's sort of unfortunate, but the facts, the statistics often aren't enough to convince people. To tell a good story, I think there are 4 key pieces we need to consider. One is, what's the purpose of your presentation? 2 is, who is my audience? And how do I have to change my approach based on that audience? Number 3 is creating a compelling narrative. So actually starting to put that story together. And number 4, putting together a good presentation. In my experience, almost all analytics eventually ends up in PowerPoint. It's kind of sad, but it's the world we live in. You may find that your organizations have a different way of making presentations, business memos, dashboards, etc. In any case, step 4 is all about actually making that presentation. When I think about the purpose, I like to think about 3 categories: inform, persuade, and activate. These 3 categories are a good way to think about structuring your presentation. So on the easy side, inform, this is really, I just want to give you information. I want to tell you what's happening. Persuade means we need to spend a little bit of time convincing you that something is perhaps the right thing to do, or convincing you that we should take a different strategy. And activate is when we actually need someone to do something, whether that's give you data, invest in what you're doing, give you access to their team, etc. A presentation can, of course, have more than one purpose. My experience is that almost all of my presentations are persuade or activate. I very, very rarely spend time just doing updates. So in my role at Borealis, a big part of what I do is going out through the business, trying to convince business owners that they should be using machine learning, that they should be using analytics to change their business. And that takes a lot of persuasion sometimes. All of you here have bought into analytics, right? You all believe that there's value here. I'm guessing at your organizations, there are many people who don't believe that. And it's going to be up to you to persuade them. In terms of knowing your audience, I think that many different audiences require a different approach. So I think through what I need my audience to know, what I need them to feel, and what I need them to do. And if you can think through these things, you can really tailor that presentation so it's impactful for them. For example, at a big bank like where I work, we have very senior executives and we have junior analysts straight out of university. When I'm presenting to those groups, they need very different content, right? Analysts want to see your code, maybe the output from a model. Whereas a senior executive who runs an entire business, they don't care about any of that. So how do we take our very complex analytics work and turn it into something meaningful for that group? Often the answer is taking the output and translating it into business outcomes. So how do you take a prediction from a model and turn it into something meaningful for a business? The most recent project I worked on was trying to predict how much credit is safe for a customer to take on. So many of us have credit cards. And when your bank decides to give you a credit card, we're trying to make a prediction about how much money we can lend you. If we lend you too much, then you end up defaulting on that loan. You can't pay it back. And that means we lose a bunch of money. And if we give you too little, then you might not use the card. You might go to another bank that will give you more money. So when we make that prediction, we have to go and explain how our prediction is going to change the business, how much extra credit we'll be able to lend out, how much we reduce the probability of a write-off or a default. We don't really talk about the model at all. Instead, we talk about those business outcomes, what's going to change as a result of those predictions. Once we've figured out our purpose and learned a little bit about our audience, we then have to construct a narrative. And I like these three approaches for pulling together complex narratives: the storytelling pyramid, SCR, and the narrative flow. I'll talk about each of them briefly. The pyramid principle is based on a book called The Pyramid Principle. It's written by Barbara Minto, and she was a partner at McKinsey. McKinsey's a very big, very famous consulting firm. My first job out of university was in consulting. So we all had to read this book, and we all had to structure our presentations this way. I really like this framework for pulling together complex thoughts in an easy to understand way. Here's how it's structured. At the top of the pyramid, we have our key takeaway. This is the number one message you need your audience to leave with. Underneath that, we have main arguments. These are supporting pieces of information that lead your audience to that key takeaway. And there's an important piece here. It's called mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive. What this means, put simply, is that your arguments should not overlap. And your arguments should completely explain why the key takeaway is the right key takeaway. From there, we can work on sub-arguments, data. This is where we may use data visualizations, some analysis to support those main arguments, to provide evidence there. And I really like this framework because it works both up and down. So if you're starting at the bottom of the pyramid and working your way up, well, you've got this data, this analysis, these visualizations that support an argument, that support a key takeaway. And that's a nice way to build up to a final point. But it also works coming back down. If you present this key takeaway first, then you can start building up all of the reasons. You can answer the what, the why, the how questions to really reinforce that message. Now, of course, these frameworks are just frameworks. I don't actually mean for you to give a presentation in the pyramid. These are ways of structuring your thinking. And when I give a presentation, often to some very senior leaders, I will write out my thoughts on a piece of paper like this to help me structure that presentation later. So please don't just fill in these boxes and think that's a presentation. This is a way of structuring your thinking to make better presentations. The second framework I really like is called SCR, or Situation Complication Resolution. It's very simple. The situation is what's going on right now. It's a stable, steady state. It has to be something that your entire audience agrees with, that we know is true. The complication is something that raises a question or changes what's going on today. And then the resolution is what's going to resolve the complication. What are we going to do about that complication? And the reason I really like this framework is because it's very flexible. If you rearrange the order of this, you very much change the narrative. If we keep it in the original order, situation, complication, resolution, it sort of sounds like a story. We tell the story about what's going on today, what's changed, what we need to do. But if you only have 5 or 10 minutes to give this presentation, well, we can pull our resolution up front, no nonsense, tell your audience exactly what we need to do, and let them read the rest if they have time. Alternatively, we can bring the complication up front and build a sense of urgency, a burning platform to work off of. Again, just a structure to organize your thinking, but as you move these around and combine it with that understanding of what am I trying to accomplish today? What does my audience need from me? You can start putting together some really compelling narratives. The last one I want to talk about is what I call the narrative flow. And this is a classic storytelling approach. This I really just use for user stories. It's a great way to talk about how a customer is interacting with your business, highlight pain points in that customer experience or customer journey. So working for a bank, we tell stories about how customers go to our branches and have these terrible experiences where the tellers can't help them, where they've been told their accounts are locked down, that there's fraud on their accounts, which is a terrible experience. And we talk about how we can make that better. This is a great way of giving people a sense for how customers are actually experiencing your business. And all of these frameworks actually fit together quite nicely. So you might start with a user story, and the conclusion of that user story might be the key takeaway in the pyramid principle. All great ways to structure your thinking. In sum on all of this, here's a couple bullets on how I think we should be telling stories. Come up with a core idea, a core purpose for your presentation. Structure it and actually write out your ideas using one or more of the frameworks we talked about. I actually write out on a piece of paper or a whiteboard what I think is important to do for these presentations. I find it's a much more compelling way of structuring these things. Tie all of your main ideas to that purpose. Make sure everything supports that purpose. And then focus on what your audience needs and adapt to that. I find these presentations are very, very important. It's a big part of what I do. Even being an analytics professional, I spend more time in PowerPoint than I do in Python. And it's a sad reality of the industry, but it's the way we all spend our time now. So much of this is convincing other people of the right thing to do instead of just doing the right thing. From here, I said you really have to put together a good presentation. So I want to talk a little bit about slides and putting slides together before we jump into data visualization. I'm often asked, how do I take all of these frameworks and actually put them into a single slide? And so I want to show you some slides from a McKinsey presentation. I think consultants do a great job at putting together very easy to understand slides. The way they do this is by using some of those frameworks we talked about. So on the left-hand side of the slide here is our storytelling pyramid with our key takeaway at the top, our main arguments in the middle, and our sub-arguments in your data at the bottom. And the slide on the right follows that framework very closely. So in the title, we have a key takeaway. In this case, we're saying the United States Postal Service is experiencing unprecedented losses. And this was true about 10 years ago. The US Postal Service almost went bankrupt. They required government bailouts. Our main arguments, well, we can see our main arguments in this chart here, where we have a few changes. So we weren't allowed to increase the rate for postage. There was a new law signed in 2006. And then we have sub-arguments and data, and that shows up on the right-hand side of the slide here. We've got a couple different reasons why revenue declined. We've got some information around what they were trying to do to combat this, but it all ties back to this one key takeaway, that we're experiencing unprecedented losses. I've tried to take a bunch of these and put together a couple key tips. So I'm going to show you 12 of my tips for good slides, and then I'll show you another McKinsey slide for how it all comes together. Tip number 1, your key message should go in the header of your slides. So no generic titles. Make sure that the header of your slide says something important. Right below that header, make sure there are supporting arguments. If there's multiple, make it clear that there are different arguments. You don't have to have many, you can have one, but if there's going to be multiple, make sure it's easy to break them apart. Highlight your key points. Make sure people know what to pay attention to on the slide. When we talk about data visualization, I'll show you some patterns that we use to capture people's attention very quickly. Leave a small margin around the edge of your slide and use evident flow in your slides. So most of us read from left to right and top to bottom. Knowing that, structure your slides that way. It's how many of us are going to be reading your slides. We're going to read the title first, and we're going to go to the top left below the title and read from there. If you live somewhere where you read in a different direction, use that to your advantage. Make sure your arguments are supported by simple and very neat illustrations. Support your arguments and support your graphs with a conclusion. If you're trying to make a point, tell your audience what it is. Use your slide work to help you. I'm on number 8. I like the idea of having a visual tracker throughout your PowerPoint so people know where you are in your story. And then from a formatting perspective, later today we'll talk about something called cognitive load. Formatting can go a long way to help or hurt your presentation. I try very hard to keep a consistent color, font type, font size throughout the entire presentation. Make sure your font's big enough. Anytime you've got data in your slides, make sure people know where it's coming from, include the source, and ensure that everything's nicely aligned. I know it sounds a little nitpicky, but nicely formatted slides go a very long way to helping your presentation. Where I work, many people put together absolutely awful looking presentations. And I'll show you some of them later today when we talk about data visualizations. And they just don't work that well. People don't want to see them. People don't want to pay attention. They're hard to read. So a little bit of work here goes a long way to making things better. Let me show you how some of these come together in another slide by McKinsey from the same presentation. Now, I know these slides are a bit old now, so they're not as pretty as what we can make today. They're not in Tableau or anything like that, but I still think they're a good example. So number 1, key message in the header. The base case leads to a loss of $33 billion and cumulative losses of $238 billion. That's a key takeaway. There's a lot of information in that, and it's a big message. 3 supporting arguments to that key takeaway. On the left-hand side, we have a revenue and cost chart. We have annual net losses, and then we have cumulative losses. These all build up to that one key takeaway. All of the charts are easy to read. I don't know anything about the US Postal Service, but I can understand what's going on in these charts. They don't look good. We've used call-out boxes here to draw people's attention to important things. Really great way of guiding your audience to what's important to pull out of these charts. evident flow from left to right. These charts build on one another to get to cumulative losses. So you have to read them left to right, and that's how we want to read them. Makes sense, it's nice and easy. There's a nice small little margin around the edge of the slide here. Makes it very, very easy to read. So I know an old slide, but a great example of how you can use some of these tips and tricks to really tell a compelling story and put a lot of information on a single slide. I'm going to stop there so we can take a break briefly. But I just wanted to summarize this all up by saying that I know it's not Python. I know it's not a technical material, but very, very important. I spend way too much of my day doing presentations, despite being an analytics person. As you're growing analytics teams at your organizations, the most important thing that I've seen in my experiences is convincing other people to do analytics. You already know you want to do it. What are your peers going to say when you show up with technical output? Right? When you show up with a predictive model, they're going to say, why should I trust it? I don't understand it. What's going to change? What's the benefit? So how do you tell a really compelling story here to make sure that we can actually make a difference? I've seen far too many projects fail because of exactly that, because we haven't explained, because people don't understand, because people are nervous. Okay, let's take a 10-minute break. I'll see you back here at 7:05, and then we'll jump into talking about data visualizations, and we'll get a little bit of practice. We'll see you in 10 minutes. Do about your business, right? You live it, you breathe it, you're passionate about it. I couldn't possibly know as much as you. And being a little bit candid there and telling people that I need you to help me understand where you need help is often the first step there. You know, we really do need analytics and the business to come together to drive value. The second thing I'm always thinking about is, so once you come together, you decide you're going to work together, a business team and an analytics team. What's the right cadence to come together and talk about what's happened? I always talk about this first step as being a sort of gut check, because so this has happened to me in the past. You go to your business, you talk about a problem you're going to solve. They give you this data. You do your exploration, you come back and you start giving them some summary statistics from that data, right? You know, here's the number of customers, the average transaction size, and the business leader comes back and says, nope, that's all wrong. You know, you're off by this much here, you're off by that much there. Turns out the data is terrible. So how do you bring everyone along at the right pace? How do you check in often enough to make sure that the analytics team isn't going away and doing something not valuable, right? I told that story in the first class about the data scientist who was trying to predict all of our customers' age. When we know every customer's age, we ask, the very first thing we do is we ask you how old you are when you were born. This used to happen all the time. And it took a long time to change people's mindset from, I just want to do analytics, to, I want to make money for my business. I'll say a few more things, but Dennis has his hand up.
Yes, Alex, thanks. Actually, I can't but disagree with the fact that data visualization is the cherry on the top. Because, well, I'm a consultant, so I visualize for a living. And that's why I can say that you can do visualization like in the end of your analytical process to show the results. But you can do visualization in the beginning of your analytical process just to derive insights. Because as humans, we don't understand these Excel spreadsheets and so on. And to bring together many people, many experts from different parts of organization, and to make them all understand the data, you have to visualize. And then in a brainstorming or in some kind of other exercise, you can derive insights from this visualization. And that's the only way to make different people, not analytics people, but just human beings, to work on the same data set and derive insights from that. I have many, many cases when, for example, only data visualization actually helped us to show the owners of the company that if they go in the same way, they will become bankrupt in 2 or 3 years. And well, they were quite rich and quite confident at that time, but visualizing the process and the increasing costs and the shrinking revenues, we can show them that, well, in 2 or 3 years, your EBITDA will be negative and banks will ask the loans back, and this will be the collapse and the end of your company. And this was the starting point, not the end, but the starting point to start thinking about how we stop these increasing costs, how we rearrange our growth plan, and so on and so on. So before I started MMA, I did the Harvard course, Data Science for Business. And they have this data-driven decision-making framework. And in this data-driven decision-making framework, data visualization is in the beginning. It's after formulating a business problem, wrangling data, then data visualization, and then hypothesis analysis, and so on. So communicating with visualization is only the last step. But starting with visualization, for me, is crucial, and it's not cherry on the top. It's like presenting it in the right way to really draw attention to the problem and to find the problem, actually, because you can't even find it without right visualization.
Yeah, you are absolutely right, and visualization is useful along the entire analytics project, right? It's like I said, one of the first things I do. You explore your data, you put together visualizations, you take it back to the business and you say, does this make sense? All I'm doing is I'm summarizing your data. Does this make sense to you? Is this how many customers you have? Is this how many branches you have, stores you have? Is this how many transactions you have a day? Sometimes the answer is no, and it's because the data is terrible, but you would never know otherwise. So you go up front, you can do this gut check. You make sure you're working on the same problem. You're working together on that problem. Then you start pulling insights out of your data with these visualizations, right? Instead of just doing, counts of customers, counts of transactions, total sales, things like that. You start taking different cuts. Remember in SQL, we talked about how to filter by rows and columns. We put in those where clauses so we can start looking at different customer segments. We can start looking at different geographies very easily. You start visualizing those, and suddenly the data comes to life. It starts telling you the story about what a business is doing. So getting some practice here, being able to do this yourself, really, really valuable tool. Thanks for sharing, Tess. Any other thoughts on this before we move on to talk about dashboarding? Anyone else with experience in this space, whether good or bad, at your own organizations? All right. Well, then let us talk a little bit about dashboards. My experience is working for a large company. I've worked for a few of them. We do way too much reporting. I mean, dozens and dozens and dozens of reports a day. And they're not good. They're static. They just get emailed to you every morning. No one reads them. And you have sometimes hundreds of people working on generating these reports, and many of them aren't even sure why. The recent trend I've seen is shifting from those static reports, moving everything into dashboards. And this means fewer reports, fewer people working on them, more automation. It solves a lot of the problems inherent in reporting. Being able to do this automated in real time and empowering people across the organization to do their own analysis, to draw their own insight from the data. It's really, really powerful. If you're using a proper dashboarding tool like Tableau or Power BI, they often hook up directly to enterprise databases or data lakes. So you can pull data at any frequency you need. Some reports you might want weekly, others daily, others in real time. And the nice part about working with tools like this is once you connect them to a database, all you need to do is send users a link. They can open it up, they can see it whenever they need it, they can interact with it whenever they need it. But just like anything else, there are a few best practices to think about when designing a dashboard, because they can get very complicated very quickly. And if they get complicated, people won't use them. If you remember, we spoke about the storytelling pyramid. I like the same sort of structure for dashboards. I call it progressive disclosure. And progressive disclosure is the idea that you need your most substantial information right at the top, the key messages right up top, and as you move down through the dashboard, you release more information, more data. On the left-hand side here, this is a newspaper article. Newspapers, blogs, all follow progressive disclosure. So if you're used to reading a newspaper, you know you can sometimes just read the first paragraph or two, understand the whole story, and understand whether or not you want to keep reading. Same principle for dashboards. Let me show you how this looks. This is a dashboard I helped build years ago. This was for a casino in Ontario, so a place where you can go and gamble. Most substantial info at the top. These are our key KPIs. The number of members in the loyalty program, how many people went to the casino. Coin in is how much people are betting. This is how much people were losing at the casino. And this was the number of points they earned. But these were the key metrics, the most important things for the casino owner to understand. So the first thing you do, you open up your dashboard, you can see this right away. And then we went on to a little bit more information about, for example, the loyalty members. When did people join? We could see that over a few years, loyalty members were really falling and then picked up in 2010. Earnings by deciles. And as we go further down, we get into more detail. So down here, we have a map of where our loyalty customers are. We've got a distribution here of how frequently they come to the casino, how far away they are. So this progressive disclosure technique puts the most important information up top, lots of details down below. On the left-hand side, and this is one of the best parts of both Tableau, Power BI, the ability to filter. So now any person can go in here and say, well, I really want to understand what the youngest age group does at the casino. What do 18 to 25-year-olds do at the casino versus 55 to 65 years old? I want to understand how far people travel to the casino. So how can I show different cuts of this data very, very quickly? And all of these data points are dynamically linked to the filters. This is a huge improvement over static reporting. This dashboard ended up removing dozens of individual reports. It's something that the leadership team can look at, not every day, but whenever they need to understand what's going on at their own organization. When they're taking on a project to understand more about a certain age group, a certain location, they can get that information themselves, right? They don't have to email you and your analytics team to learn about the business. So hugely important. This progressive disclosure makes for very compelling dashboards. The other thing I'll say is try to stick to a single page dashboard. As soon as you have to scroll or move through multiple pages, you really lose this sort of cohesive presentation. So these single page ones are great. What I've done in the past is if you want to have more information available, you can always include separate views of the dashboard for different people. So for example, at the bank, we want to give branch managers information about how their branch is doing. Sales volume, transaction volume, etc. But the head of all the branches doesn't care about your one branch, right? We have 1,200 branches. They want to see at a regional level or a provincial level. So we produced 3 different pages with different levels of detail for those different groups. And they can all go up and down the pages as they need to. And it's all driven by the same information, the same data set, just at different levels of aggregation. This worked out really, really well for us. A couple tips on dashboards. They should always be focused on enabling decision-making. Sometimes they're just for information, but if you empower your audience to pull insights out of them, they're going to be much, much better for you. And just like in storytelling, we should really try and understand the purpose and the audience for these dashboards so we can tailor them appropriately to that group. Always limit complexity. Remember Hick's law, how complicated things get, how long it takes to make a decision. Add interactivity. So make sure you can filter, make sure you can drill down on information, pull insights out of those dashboards, and use those visual cues to guide your reader through the dashboard appropriately. Okay, we've been going for 2 hours, so let's take another 10-minute break. When we come back, I'll do some demonstrations with you. I'll show you Tableau, I'll show you some visualizations in Python, and then we'll break into our teams, and we'll spend a little bit of time for questions and discussion as well. So I will see you at about 8:05. See you soon. All right, we'll get started in just a minute as people make their way back. Okay, I have 2 things to show you. The first, I'm going to show you Tableau, how to build visualizations in Tableau, how to build your first dashboard in Tableau. And then I'll show you how to build some visualizations in Python and get you started there. After that, we'll break into teams and we'll do a few visualization exercises. So let's start with Tableau. I have open here Tableau Public. There are 3, maybe 4 versions of Tableau. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the differences, but there's a few things you should know. Tableau Public is free. Anyone can download it. The only constraint is that you can't save Tableau workbooks to your own computer. You can only save them to Tableau's cloud. So please don't put any proprietary or confidential information in Tableau Public. It's good for school, it's good for learning, not good for work. The paid version of Tableau is called Tableau Desktop. That lets you save things locally. It's very expensive. I believe it's $2,000 US a year for a license. So very expensive. There's a free piece of software called Tableau Reader that lets you just open but not create Tableau dashboards. And the last one is called Tableau Server. This is for big organizations that want to be able to share dashboards to everyone. It's very, very expensive. It requires servers, etc. Once you're a big enough organization, once you're good at dashboards, Tableau Server is a great tool. Power BI follows a similar structure. I also don't believe that there's any real advantages one way or the other. Tableau, Power BI, whatever your organization uses is just fine. They're both great tools. I do Tableau because they have a nice student edition and because my organizations have always used Tableau, but I know lots that use Power BI. The same theory applies. When you first open Tableau, whether public or desktop, you're going to see this screen. You have a few options here. On the right-hand side, this says open from Tableau Public. This is how you open an existing dashboard, something you've already made. But if you'd like to start from scratch, you can connect, this is Tableau's way of saying open, an Excel file, PDFs, spatial files, or you can connect directly to a server. This is where you could connect to Google Drive or Google Sheets. This is where you could connect to a SQL server or a data lake directly and pull data from there. You can actually write SQL queries directly in Tableau to pull in your data. We're not going to import data from a server. We don't have any server data. Instead, we'll import files from Excel. And you can also do this just by dragging and dropping data. So if I just grab our grocery data file and drop it over, we'll see it spends a little bit of time thinking and it imports our data. This is the data import screen. And you can import multiple data files at the same time. Up here, you can link them together. So you remember in SQL, we talked about joining tables. Same thing in Tableau. You can join tables as long as there's a matching key. If you imported and wanted to play with our data from last class, customers and transactions, you'd be able to link them on customer ID. It would create one big table for you. So all of those data manipulation features built into Tableau. In the right-hand side at the bottom, this is just a preview of our grocery data. This is the same data we saw in week 1. And on the left, this is some information about the type of data it thinks we've imported. This little symbol here means it thinks everything's a number, and that's fine for now. To create a visualization or a dashboard, we have to use these buttons down here. So you'll see it says go to worksheet. If we click on sheet 1, this is our Tableau canvas. This is where we build our visualizations. These 3 buttons here are how we create new worksheets. So this button here is a new worksheet. Now we're on sheet 2. This button here is a new dashboard. Dashboards are a combination of many visualizations, whereas a worksheet is only one visualization. And this far right one here is called a story. Stories are like PowerPoints built into Tableau. I rarely see them used. It's mostly worksheets and dashboards. Tableau is very much a drag and drop application. Very little coding. You'll see here we have two places to drag and drop, columns and rows. This refers to the columns and rows of your visualization. So let's say we wanted to create a scatter plot of grocery bill and family income. Well, we could go over here and grab grocery bill and drag it over to columns. you'll see the first thing it does is it tries to create a visualization for you. This is just a bar chart. That's the sum of grocery bills. We could then grab family income and drag it over to rows. And it's going to try and create a scatter plot for us. Now, you can see that we've only got one data point here. That's because Tableau by default tries to aggregate all of the numeric values. This is useful for some charts, not useful for others. You see how next to both grocery bill and family income, it shows sum. Well, it's adding them all up. We have a few options here. The best way to solve this is if you go into the analysis option in the menu bar, you can turn off a function called aggregate measures. And that makes a nice little dashboard for us. One of the really nice pieces of Tableau is if you hover over any data point, it gives you the information on it. So it's a very clean way of doing data labels. Very nice to be able to go in here and see every point. On the left-hand side, we have some extra options here. Marks are ways of adding extra information to our visualization. So say, for example, we wanted to see if being a vegetarian changed something about your grocery bill. Well, we could take vegetarian, click and drag it over to color. And now it'll create two separate colors, one for vegetarian and one for not vegetarian. We'll see it here marked with colors. We could, of course, change this and say, okay, we want it to be based on size, and it'll change the size of those points. So these options here, they allow us to add extra information, colors, different sizes, labels if we wanted to. So put data labels next to every point. This doesn't look very clean, but it's an option. And if we want to get rid of them, we just drag it away and it disappears. Now, if we wanted to use some of this data as a categorical piece of data, so for example, number of adults really is categorical, right? It's not a continuous value. There's only 1 or 2 or 3 adults. Tableau gives us the ability to change from what's called a measure to a dimension. These are Tableau's fancy words for continuous number, discrete number. If we change it to a dimension and we tell Tableau that it's discrete, we now can do some better visualizations with this. So, for example, we could create a bar chart of grocery bill by number of adults. So we can start breaking this out by discrete values. And Tableau gives us lots of ways to change this information. By default, this is the sum, but we can change to average, medians, counts. Let's change that to the average. And we can see that on average, more adults means a higher grocery bill. It's pretty intuitive. On the right-hand side here, there's this menu called Show Me. Show Me shows you all of the different charts that you can make with the current data you've selected. So we could quickly change this to be a stacked bar, for example, or change it to a table, if that's what we wanted. The ones that are grayed out, we can't do with the current data we've selected. We have to change something. This is telling us for a histogram, we can only have one measure. That makes sense, right? Histograms only work for one piece of continuous data. So if we wanted a histogram, we would have to do something like grocery bill. And now the histogram is highlighted. So we can do that, and it will automatically create a histogram for us. The best way to get comfortable with this is to just play around, drag and drop things, break it a little bit. I find Tableau to be fairly intuitive. The drag and drop is really nice, very, very low code. If we want to create titles, you'll see that by default, they name them sheet 1 or sheet 2. You can just change them down here by double clicking, and it will update the titles there. Let's update these 3 quickly. Now, if we want to create a dashboard, dashboards are made up of worksheets. If I click this button here, it will create a new dashboard for me. And you'll see it says drop sheets here. The way we create a dashboard is by taking the visualizations we made earlier and dragging them into the dashboard. And you'll see that as I move my mouse around, it highlights different areas of the dashboard to snap the visualization to, and it will automatically resize other visualizations as you need. So very easy to make nicely organized dashboards here. I always recommend showing a dashboard title. You can have a nice title there. You can change the size of your dashboard. What you'll find is that if your organization has a standard laptop that they give everyone, you can make the size to be the size of that laptop screen, which is kind of nice. Of course, you can add lots of formatting options here. You can add borders around all of your charts. You can resize things. So lots to play around with. The one thing that I think is very important to show you is this button right here. That button lets you use a visualization as a filter. So if we select these, and I'm going to select it for all of our visualizations here, it means that we can use any of these visualizations to filter the rest. So let's say I wanted to know more about 1 adult households. Well, if I click that, all of the other visualizations change to be filtered on just 1 individual household. Click it again, goes back to normal. What about 3 adult households? Well, there's your 3 adult households. Because you can link all of these things together, you can basically do some easy analytics right in the dashboard. Really handy, highly recommend doing this. As long as you're sticking with fairly simple dashboards, small amounts of data, you can filter everything, which is great. The last one I want to show you is, if you remember the Tableau dashboard I showed you in the PowerPoint, there were filters on the left-hand side. You can add those very easily as well. You add them from a worksheet and just drag that over to this filter column here. It's going to ask how we want to filter. We want to filter on all values. This is between 0 and 1. And now we can use vegetarian as a filter. If I come over here, and click show filter, I can now include 0s and 1s as I need to change all of my visualizations. Same thing goes here. I can bring that filter over to my dashboard so that I have filters for the entire dashboard. And of course, to move things around, you can just drag and drop, move them wherever you need, including the filters, including legends, all that sort of stuff. Very, very easy to work with. You can add extra information like images, web pages with the objects down here. Bring it all together to create a pretty good looking dashboard. I see there's a few things going on in the chat here. So one of the questions was, is the dashboard, can the dashboard be modified by other users? And the answer is no. You can put a lot of security on top of Tableau, which I think is great. Generally, what we do is we completely limit edit abilities to just the people building the dashboard. You can optionally allow people to download data or lock that down. You can limit access, so only certain people can open dashboards. Once you get to the point of using Tableau Server, you can basically restrict access to any person, any group of people. You can restrict their ability to download data, to interact with dashboards. It's actually a very good software reporting solution. The way it's shared is generally through a link. So if you have a Tableau server, you'll create your dashboard, you'll upload it to the server, it will give you a link that you can send out to everyone across the organization. I believe Power BI has some of the same features built in. So very easy to get this out across everyone who needs access to it. Okay, that is a brief intro to Tableau. You'll have an opportunity to play around with this a little later today. If you've not yet downloaded it, I recommend you start now. It is a pretty large piece of software, so it can take a little while to download for you. The next thing I want to show you is some data visualizations in Python. So on Canvas, I've uploaded a Jupyter notebook called Getting Started with Data Viz. And this is going to show you your first data visualization. Up at the top here, this first cell, this is the same import data code that I use every week. It just brings in that grocery data Excel file and prints out the first 5 records. For visualizations in Python, I recommend Matplotlib. This is how you import it. The shorthand for that is most often PLT. So I import it as PLT. And the syntax for creating a visualization is PLT period, and then the name of the visualization you want to create. In this case, I want to make a scatter plot. So I make a scatter plot with grocery bill along the x-axis and family income along y. And then we always finish with plt.show. If you remove that, it prints out some extra information down here that we don't need. I always prefer to keep plt.show. This is the simplest syntax for a graph in Matplotlib. You can make this much, much more complex. Here are 2 things that I like to play around with. You can use additional arguments at the end to change the shape and color of your visualization. If you include the letter S and a number, it will change the size. We can change this to any number we want and make those numbers, those data points bigger and smaller. We can also include the C argument to change the color. And you just put in any color you want here. It will change the color. I highly recommend checking out the documentation for Matplotlib linked right here. It's going to give you information on all of the different charts you can make, all of the different ways you can customize it, how to add data labels, chart titles, all sorts of different things. It's a very, very flexible way of making visualizations. Obviously, a little bit harder than Tableau because you need to write the code here. But you should be able to use this exact same setup, change the type of chart you want to make, change the variable you're going to use here, and create a chart fairly easily. This Jupyter Notebook is available on Canvas, so I recommend you download this, start with it. As long as you've got your grocery data stored in a data folder in the same location as this Jupyter Notebook, you should be able to import this right away with this line of code and start working. For our team breakouts today, there are a few exercises at the very end of the PowerPoint presentation. On slides 58 and 59, there are some visualizations I'd like you to try and make, both in Python and in Tableau. And then on slide 59, there's some instructions on on an exercise to make a dashboard using that grocery store data. So I recommend you play around with Tableau, create some visualizations, and then pull it all together into a dashboard to get some practice here. You don't have to submit these to me. Again, these are just class exercises, they're for practice, but these will be useful for your practical projects, and they'll be useful for the final project in the course as well. Dashboarding is a really great tool in this space. Before we break away into teams, any questions on what we covered today? Data visualizations, dashboards, Tableau, Python.
Не могли бы вы показать еще раз, как вы добавили файл и нарисовали самую первую диаграмму?
Yes, absolutely. So this is the Jupyter Notebook.
Нет, про табло. In Tableau, please.
Oh, yeah. Okay, I'm going to get out of my current setup. If I click on this top left Tableau icon, it takes me back to the home screen, if you will. Two ways to import data. Either select what you're going to input, Excel, and this will open up Finder or Windows Explorer, whether you're on Mac or Windows, and you can browse to find a file. Or just click and drag a file into Tableau. Feel free to import multiple sets of data here and link them together as you need. This new union button will help, but Tableau will try and automatically link files for you when you drag them in together. Once you've got your data in, we can click on this button right here, this new worksheet button, to get a blank Tableau sheet. And from here, you should really just play around with dragging different options into rows and columns, changing whether they show up as dimensions or measures. Use the Show Me button up here to get information on different available chart types. And play around with them, see how they work, see what kind of information they're asking for. For example, a pie chart wants a dimension and a measure. So this is a very bad pie chart. Stacked bar charts want a dimension and a measure as well. And the way you do this is just by dragging data from the left-hand side tables over to columns and rows and changing their data types. To start over, just drag them all away. Everything goes back to normal. You can also change the data types. So if you know that a certain column is always going to be discrete, you can change it on the left-hand side by saying convert to discrete. And you'll see it changes the color there. And then it will always show up as a dimension. And we get our categories from that column. Does that help? The best thing to do, jump in, play around, break it a little bit. All of these things are a bit intimidating to start, but they get easy very, very quickly.